Good morning. Welcome to the Vineyard Church. If you are new with us, I just want to extend a huge welcome. I'm so glad that you've came, that you've chosen to come here for some reason today. Welcome to part 2 in a 3-part series called The Art of Neighboring. So I've heard some stories shuffling around from those of you who have chosen to try this out, and it's so fun to hear your stories. The art of neighboring. Last week, Amos talked to us. He kind of set the stage, and towards the end, he gave us this neighboring map. Do you remember it? There's a picture that will come up. This map, and we were supposed to fill out the names of the people who live closest to us. Now, I'll admit I was really full of pride because I am a talker, and I love to meet people, and this neighboring idea, it is just who I am at the depths. Right? I love to do this. And so in my pride, I'm filling out these names, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh man, there's this one family. Actually, it's a couple, and I don't know their name. And there's a reason why I don't know their name. It's because they're mean, right? Like, my friends have parked in their parking spots, which are not labeled, by the way, so you wouldn't know it was their spot. And they leave these nasty notes. And they never wave, like we'll wave and they just turn and go back in the house, right? Like they're just kind of miserable. I'm sorry, that wasn't really nice to call them mean. They are not really very friendly. And so I haven't really made much of an effort to get to know them because honestly, I don't really want to. But while we were doing this activity, I had to put a question mark because I don't know their names. And I felt this conviction inside of me, right? Like, Emily, come on, you're a pastor. You should know every name on that block, right? Well, actually, it's a townhouse community, so it's like we call them courts. And so I decided I'm not going to let this beat me. I'm going to know their name by the end of this week, right? It's Sunday. Ask me if I know their name. Actually, I know one name, but she didn't tell me it. So here's the story. Okay. Somebody else told me. Anyway, on Monday, I started getting really fearful. Like, I am terrified to go across the street because they're going to reject me, and they're going to be mean to me, and they're going to say something horrible, and I'm going to cry, and I'm going to run back to my house, like dog with tail between the legs, and it's going to be horrible. So all of these, horrible thoughts are spinning. All this fear is coming in. And then I decide, okay, that's not what Jesus would do. He would not sit here, fearful, so I'm going to pray. And I don't know why I prayed this, but somehow this is the prayer that came out inside my heart. It was this: Jesus, I know you want me to meet these neighbors, because if they're that miserable, they must really need your love. And they must really need this peace that I have because of you. And Jesus, would you just give me some compassion? I don't know why compassion was the word, but it was. And so I kept praying it. Please give me some compassion for them. And as these next few days went by, my heart started to melt. And instead of looking across the street with fear, I looked with compassion. I wonder what happened to make them unfriendly, or something must have happened, right? And all this compassion started to bubble up, and all of a sudden, I wanted to go across the street. And so by Thursday, I was ready with a plan. I decided, okay, I'll bake them cookies. Although then I was fearful that they were diabetic, and then they'd throw the cookies in my face. But anyway, I decided cookies will be a nice softener. And Maggie, she loves to bake. She's my 3-year-old. And I thought, oh, she can do it for me, right? They'll never reject a 3-year-old. I'll just send her across the street. She'd be great. She's super gregarious, Hi, what's your name? So I was going to throw her under the bus. Anyway, I go to the kitchen to make these cookies. I'll try to make a long story short. And I look out my window. My kitchen window looks out to our backyard. And Zachary, he's our 5-year-old, he's playing in the backyard with his little friend from the neighborhood. And her mom is sitting on the hill, just watching them play. And I didn't hear some voice from God or anything. I just knew I should go talk to her. We've been friends for a really long time, and we've had great spiritual conversations, and I know she believes in this Jesus, but she hasn't actually met him or experienced him. So I know that that's where she's at. And anyway, I decided I should interrupt my schedule. Now, keep this in mind. It was Thursday, so I had kickball that night. Shout out to my kickball friends at the YMCA, which I joined to get to know new people. It's so fun. I really stink at kickball. So you know I'm there to meet people, not to play. I'm really bad. I try. I'm going to lose my train of thought. Okay, so I was on a schedule. I only had 45 minutes to make the cookies, right? Is it possible? Because I had to get dinner ready, I had to get our waters ready, I had to get the kids ready for childcare before this kickball game. So I'm on a time crunch. And so I look out the window, I feel that go talk to her, but I'm like, I can't. I have to bake these cookies so I can get to know these neighbors. So I get this fight in my head, do it, don't do it, bake the cookies, talk to her, I decide to interrupt my schedule, right? I had a schedule. I decided, let's interrupt it, go and talk to her. So I go outside, I sit down beside her. She says, hey, how are you? I say, you know what? I'll be honest. I'm not doing so good. I've been trying for a week now to meet the neighbors across the street, and I'm afraid. And so we talk a little bit, and she said, well, why do you want to meet those neighbors anyway? And I said, well, you know how they seem so unfriendly? There must be a reason, right? And I want them to have peace in their hearts like I do, right? Like I am deeply content in life because I know Jesus. I really know him. Like, yes, I'm a Christian, but that aside, I know Jesus, and he is the source of all peace and happiness, and I want them to have that. And I told her a little story about how I was a Christian since I was 4, but I really met Jesus once when he came to me in a dream, right? Like I just had a dream. It was him, and he healed this awful guilt I had inside. And ever since then, I have known him, and I have found peace. And I just want those neighbors to have that. And I could see her face just light up, right? Like, I want that. I know about this Jesus, but I want that. So we talked some more. She came down, actually baked cookies with me, so I got both done at once. And I'll finish up this story. I never met those neighbors because every time I knocked on the door, they would not answer. And I did manage, I was like spying, this is terrible. I did manage to see her come out of her house, and so I ran and just like waved really quick, and she just ran back inside. So I never got the cookies in her hand. And my other neighbor told me her name. So anyway, I'm going to keep trying to get to know those neighbors. What is it that keeps us from this idea of getting to know our neighbors? Now, we know it's important to get to know our neighbors because Jesus gave us 2 greatest commandments, right? Love God and love your neighbor. Neighbor can mean many things, but it does mean your neighbor right next door, and we know it's important, but what keeps us, well, you heard this in my story, there's 2 barriers, I believe, that keep us from doing this, and that is time. We're too busy. We're just too busy. And fear. We're either afraid to be rejected, or we are afraid to talk to people about Jesus. We're afraid. We don't really know how to talk about Jesus and share this really good news with people. It's scary. Scary. So how do we knock down these barriers? How do we knock down these barriers of time, being willing to be interrupted, and fear, just being afraid? I believe that there's an answer in here. And so I want you to turn with me, if you have your Bibles, to Luke chapter 7. If you don't have your Bibles, it'll be up here on the screen for you. We're going to look at Luke chapter 7, and I believe we will find some answers by looking at who Jesus really is. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. This is a great story. Now, one of the Pharisees, so Pharisees were these like religious big shots. They thought they knew everything. One of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind him, at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more?" Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled." "You have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." So there are 2 things that I want to pull from this. I could talk forever on this story, but just 2. First of all, I want you to picture what this would have looked like in Jesus' time, so 1st century, and the Pharisee's house. So Jesus gets invited to the Pharisee's house, which I think is cool because we talk about how Jesus always partied with the sinners, and he did. But he also accepted an invitation to the Pharisee's house, the religious big shot. Now this house, when the Pharisees invited someone famous to dinner, and Jesus was famous, whether you believed that he was God's son or not, he was a public figure known all over for the wonderful things that he did. And so since Jesus was this public figure, when he went to the dinner at the Pharisees, people outside, so all of the neighbors and all of the community members, they could come to the dinner and not go inside, right, and eat at the table, but, well, they could maybe go inside. It depends. Can you put that picture up real quick, Debbie? So there maybe were 2 options. Either the Pharisee lived in a kind of house that was open, kind of to the outside, like this picture, and so the people could just stand around while the Pharisee and Jesus and the friends ate, and then they could hear the conversation. Or they really went into a house, and the people of the community were allowed to come and stand around the outside. That was customary. So it is not strange that this sinful woman was there at the dinner. What was strange is that she ran into the table, right? So in that time, they laid down, they reclined on these big pillows, and she runs in to his feet. She interrupts him. Right? Jesus has a schedule. I mean, obviously he doesn't have an iPhone with his, what do you call those? Calendars, Google Calendar. But if he did, it would have said dinner with the Pharisees, not let me get interrupted by the sinful woman who's running in and embarrassing me, right? That would have been embarrassing. She was probably a prostitute, and she ran in, interrupted the dinner, throws herself at his feet. So what does Jesus do, right? He does not say to her, "You're interrupting my schedule. I don't have time for this," and send her out. No, none of that, right? I imagine he just looks at her with the utmost love because he knows her heart. What she's really doing is when she pours this perfume on her feet, when she wipes her feet, his feet with her hair, this was also customary. It was a sign of deep affection and also supplication. Please. So she's saying, "Please forgive me. Jesus, I've sinned. I know that I'm wrong. Could you please forgive me?" He sees her heart. He knows it. And he allows himself to be interrupted. Why? Because he has compassion. So as you're thinking about this, I don't want to be interrupted by my next door neighbor. Ask for some compassion. Give me, Lord, some compassion for these people right outside my door. He allows himself to be interrupted. That's the first point I want to make. And the second is in relation to this idea of fear. This idea of fear. Now, I want to focus on, well, let me put it this way. We've got the Pharisee and we've got the sinful woman. Which one is a Christian? Weird, right? Well, first of all, Jesus isn't a Christian. Right? He never came and said, I'm ready, I'm here to start Christianity. Right? That wasn't part of his plan. The sinful woman and the Pharisee, which one really understood Jesus? Which one really got it? It was the sinful woman. She's the one who really experienced his love. She is the one whose heart said, Jesus, I can't do this anymore. I cannot. I am not at peace. Please, please forgive me and bring me peace. You are the one who can save. So she is the one who really gets it. It's the Pharisee who is deeply confused, right? He thinks that he is the utmost wonderful Jew. He has followed all of the rules. He has read and knows the book, the Torah, as you will. He knows every law, all of Deuteronomy, right? Like, don't do this, don't do that, do this. He knows it all, and he's probably followed it. And he thinks he gets it, but he doesn't. And so who actually needs Jesus, right? The sinful woman, she gets it. She's got it. She's good. It's the Pharisee. So let's think of the Pharisee right now as Jesus' neighbor that he's trying to reach to. How does he do it? Does he say to the Pharisee, to Simon, does he say, hey, Simon, bring me your Torah. Let me show you in Leviticus, right here it says, love your neighbor. Do not judge the sinful woman. He's judging her, right? He doesn't say it out loud, but in his mind he's thinking, I cannot believe that this rabbi is letting this happen. He's judging her. And Jesus reads his mind, as Jesus knows all of us, every thought, right? And so he says, hey, Simon. Well, first, does he say, hey, Simon, bring me your Torah? No. Does he say, hey, Simon, what kind of a Jew are you? Right? No, he doesn't. He doesn't bring up Jewish tradition or this religiosity. He's not going to give some ecclesiastical, theological debate. No, he says, hey, Simon, let me tell you what? A story. A story. Simon, let me just tell you a story. How easy is that? You know, I grew up and I always thought I had to debate with people. I always thought I had to have an answer for every time somebody had a question about it, that I could debate and get the right answers. He says, Simon, let me tell you a story. How easy is that, right? So he tells Simon the story about these two guys. Now, it could have been a real story. I don't know. Maybe he really did meet these two guys. One had a huge debt, 20 months worth of salary, right? So like 1 year and 3/4 worth of salary. That's how much he owed. And the other guy had just about 2 months worth of salary. And both debts are forgiven. And Jesus says, hey, Simon, what do you think? Who would love me more? Who feels the most forgiven? And Simon says, of course, the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. Jesus just tells a story. And I imagine that that story hit Simon. There's no way. I'm sure Simon is smart enough to realize what Jesus meant. That here's this woman. She's been forgiven much and she loves much. And I'm sure he understands what Jesus is trying to say is, Simon, I wish you could love me like that. I wish you could understand how much you need my forgiveness. You think you don't, but you do. And you'd be so much more at peace if you just understood you need my forgiveness. Sometimes we're afraid to meet our neighbors or afraid to share about Jesus because we have this idea in our heads that we need to convert people to Christianity. That's a little scary. I mean, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want a Buddhist to come to me and try to convert me to Buddhism. I'd be like, oh, great, thanks. You know, I'm good. We don't need to have that fear of, I've got to convert this person. What we need to do is understand who Jesus really is and share our stories. The most powerful tool, if you want to call it, I have for sharing Jesus is that he has healed me. I know it, and I am willing to share that specific story with anyone. Don't be afraid to talk about Jesus with your neighbors. It doesn't have to be a big debate. Just tell your story. How about for you today? How about for you today? What barrier is in the way of you reaching out to your neighbors? Maybe it's time. Maybe you are busy, and maybe it's fear, and maybe it's something completely different. I don't know. What I want to do to sort of end this, though, is to give you a challenge to follow along with the challenge given you last week. And so I would love for you to take out your Connect card. You may have already put it in the pouch in front of you. And so if you did, you can just pull it back out again. And I will show you an example up here of one that I filled out. What I want you to do is ask yourself, am I willing to take this challenge today? A challenge to just take one step to get to know my neighbors, the people who live right next to you. Are you willing to take one step toward neighboring? So if you are, I want you to just check that off. Yes, I am willing to take this challenge to get to know my neighbors. And then it's going to ask you to write down some kind of barrier. There might be a barrier that's keeping you from doing it, so I'm pretty afraid to be rejected. I do care what people think. I'm working on it. And then if you have some sort of neighboring story, something you've already done that you want to share, we would just love to read your stories about how you are neighboring. So I'm just going to give you 1 second, play some quiet music. I want you to fill this out and then just stick it in the pouch in front of you. And I'll be right back with you in just a second. You can continue filling those out. I just want to leave you with one final point, and that is this: do not be afraid. Jesus said that so many times. Do not be afraid. If there is some fear inside of you, I'll call you this morning to not be afraid. We're going to transition into a time of communion. And this is a time for those of us who have this relationship with Jesus. We love him, we know him, and this is a time where we get to remember him. We get to remember. I remember doing communion every week as a kid, and I remember these words: take this bread, and as you eat of it, remember him. And take this cup, which represents his blood, and remember him. So what we're going to do for communion today is that you will, while the worship team plays, you will come up on your own time and take a piece of bread and take a cup and go back to your seat. And you can take it whenever you want. We won't take it all together as a group. You take it whenever you want. But as you do, remember Jesus. Remember me. So let's pray, and then we'll begin worship. Jesus, I love you. We love you. Thank you for loving us, even when we don't deserve it. And as we eat this bread and drink from this cup, help us today, Lord, to remember you. Amen.